Some debts can only be repaid with impossible choices. Anya had survived 16 years as a slave by making herself invisible, until the day a wolf's howl shattered her silence and dragged her back to the forest that had once saved her life. The king was missing, the kingdom was crumbling, and the creature that had raised her when she was a terrified 8-year-old child was asking her to do the unthinkable, save the very man whose orders had murdered her family and destroyed everything she'd ever loved. In the shadows between revenge and mercy, between animal instinct and human morality, Anya would discover that the hardest prison to escape isn't made of chains. It's made of the promises we make to those we can't bear to lose. With 4 wolves as her only allies and a dying king as her burden, she'd be forced to choose between the freedom she'd dreamed of for 16 years and a loyalty that defied every rule of survival. But when the wolves refused to leave her side and the truth about that night 16 years ago finally surfaces, Anya will learn that some rescues save more than one life, and some cost everything you thought you knew about who deserves to live and who deserves to die. The stablemaster's whip cracked against Anya's shoulder blade before she even heard his boots on the hay. The pain bloomed white-hot, familiar, almost comforting in its predictability. She didn't flinch. Flinching only made men like Gerard strike harder, hungry for the reaction they believed they deserved. Instead, she continued brushing the black destrier's flank with slow, deliberate strokes, her breathing steady even as blood seeped warm through the rough fabric of her tunic. "You deaf slave?" Gerard's voice carried the thick slur of morning ale. "I told you to muck out the 3rd stall an hour past. You think Duke Corwin's mare enjoys standing in her own filth?" Anya's fingers tightened around the brush bristles. The destrier, a warhorse belonging to the captain of the guard, shifted his massive weight and lowered his head until his muzzle rested against her collarbone. The gesture was protective, deliberate. She felt his breath against her throat, hot and steady, his dark eye watching Gerard with an awareness that made her stomach clench. Not now, she thought desperately. Please, not now. Strange thing that, Gerard muttered, his tone shifting from anger to something more dangerous, curiosity. Every beast in this stable acts half wild around me and the other. Hands, but you, they follow you like you're one of them. He spat into the straw. Unnatural it is. Makes a man wonder what you did to deserve being sold to the crown at 11 years old. What kind of parents give up a child that young? The brush stilled in Anya's hand. Her parents hadn't given her up. Her parents had died with their blood soaking into the dirt floor of their cottage while soldiers wearing the king's colors dragged her screaming brother outside by his hair. Her mother's final sound hadn't been a word. It had been the wet gurgle of a split throat. Anya had been 8 years old, small enough to squeeze through the splintered back wall, while the red-cloaked men laughed and argued over who would search the forest for her. But Gerard didn't know that. No one knew that. The official record stated simply that Anya had been found living wild in the Forest of Howls at 11 years old, more animal than child, and had been sold to the royal household as property of the crown. What happened in the 3 years between her family's massacre and her capture existed only in her memory and in the nightmares that still woke her, gasping in the slaves' quarters. "Get to the 3rd stall," Gerard said finally, apparently satisfied with her silence. "And Anya? That cut on your shoulder? You got it falling against a pitchfork, understand?" She nodded once. He left, his footsteps fading toward the tack room where he kept his private store of wine. The moment his shadow disappeared, Anya's knees buckled. She caught herself against the destrier's shoulder, her forehead pressed to his warm neck, breathing in the scent of horse and hay and something else. Something that reminded her of cold nights and the musk of fur and the safety of being small enough to curl against a beating heart much larger than her own. The horse made a low sound in his chest, almost a purr, nothing a warhorse should produce. Anya's throat tightened. She couldn't afford this. Couldn't afford. The memories that clawed at her whenever she let herself remember what it felt like to be protected, to be loved in the wordless, absolute way that required no gratitude, no performance, no humanity. "Stop," she whispered against the destrier's neck. "You can't do this. They'll notice." But even as she spoke, she heard the soft shuffle of hooves from the other stalls. The mare in the third stall, the one supposedly too aggressive for anyone but the Duke himself to handle. The aging gelding who'd, kicked 2 stable hands hard enough to crack ribs. The young courser who bit anyone who approached her feed bucket. All of them shifting closer to the fronts of their stalls, ears pricked forward, watching her with that same impossible awareness. Anya pulled away from the destrier and grabbed the mucking shovel with trembling hands. She couldn't think about this now. Couldn't let herself remember the warmth of the den during her first winter in the forest, when she'd been so small and so broken. That the old gray wolf, the one with the scarred muzzle and the gentle eyes, had let Anya curl against her swollen belly alongside her own pups. Couldn't remember how that wolf had brought her scraps of rabbit and deer, had licked her face clean when Anya cried herself sick, had taught her through patience and repetition which plants would fill her belly and which would kill her. She'd been more wolf than girl by the time the hunters found her. She'd forgotten how to speak in words. She'd forgotten that humans wore clothes, used fire, slept in structures instead of dens. When they'd grabbed her, she'd bitten one man's hand so deeply he'd needed hot iron to seal the wound. They'd beaten her, caged her, sold her to a merchant who specialized in oddities and curiosities. That merchant had sold her to the crown, where unusual slaves were valuable for entertainment at feasts. But Anya had relearned silence, relearned stillness. She discovered that if she made herself small and useful and utterly invisible, they mostly left her alone. She'd spent 13 years in the royal stables, and in 13 years she'd spoken perhaps 1,000 words total. Silence was survival. The third stall reeked of ammonia and neglect. The mare inside, a dappled gray with wild eyes, pawed at the soiled straw and pinned her ears flat when Anya approached. But Anya didn't approach like a human. She didn't meet the mare's eyes, didn't reach out with demanding hands. Instead, she made a sound. Low in her throat, barely audible, a soft rumble that wasn't quite a growl and wasn't quite a hum. The mare's ears flicked forward. Her pawing stopped. Anya entered the stall slowly, the shovel held low and non-threatening, her body language submissive, deferential. The mare watched her work, and gradually, impossibly, the tension drained from the animal's frame. By the time Anya finished mucking out the soiled bedding and spreading fresh straw, the mare was lipping at her hair with gentle curiosity. "You shouldn't trust humans," Anya whispered, her voice cracking from disuse. "We're the ones who put whips to your back and bits in your mouth. We're the ones who—" The horn blast from the castle battlements cut through her words like a blade. 3 short bursts, then a pause, then 3 more. Anya's blood turned to ice. That pattern meant only one thing. The king was missing. King Edward, who'd ruled for 16 years with an iron fist wrapped in velvet diplomacy. King Edward, whose younger brother Duke Corwin had been positioning himself as regent for months, citing the king's increasing instability and isolation. King Edward, who, according to kitchen gossip, had been taking longer and longer solitary rides into the countryside, sometimes disappearing for days with only a single guard. The stable erupted into chaos. Grooms and stable hands poured from every corner, shouting questions, speculating wildly. Gerard appeared, his face pale despite the ale flush. All hands, "To the yard! Duke Corwin's Zhao! The Duke's Zhao!" He couldn't seem to finish the sentence. Anya stayed frozen in the mare's stall, her heart hammering against her ribs. Something was wrong. Something beyond a missing king. She could feel it in the way the horses stamped and whinnied, in the way the air itself seemed to press down with suffocating weight. And then she heard it, barely audible under the human chaos. A sound that made every hair on her body stand rigid. From somewhere deep in the forest of howls, carried on the wind that swept down from the northern mountains, came the long, mournful howl of a wolf, the old gray wolf, the one who'd saved her, the one who should have been dead for years by now, the one who was calling for her. The castle courtyard had transformed into a seething mass of armored bodies and shouted commands. Anya pressed herself against the stable wall, making herself invisible as knights mounted their war horses and servants rushed past carrying supplies. Her Shoulder throbbed where Gerard's whip had split the skin, but the pain felt distant, muffled beneath the roaring in her ears. That howl, that impossible soul-deep howl that shouldn't exist. Duke Corwin stood on the raised platform near the keep's entrance, his red velvet cloak snapping in the wind like a banner of blood. He was younger than the king by 8 years, handsome in a way that made people trust him too quickly, his smile practiced and empty. Anya had watched him for years from the shadows of the stable, watched how he touched servants just a moment too long, how his generosity always came with invisible strings, how his eyes calculated the worth of every living thing they landed upon. "My brother, your king, has been missing for 3 days," Corwin announced, his voice carrying across the courtyard with theatrical precision. "His horse returned yesterday without him, blood on the saddle but no body. We can only assume he encountered some misfortune in the Forest of Howls during his latest retreat." The pause before that final word dripped with implication. "I am organizing search parties. Any man who brings back news of the king's whereabouts will be rewarded with 10 gold crowns. Any man who brings back the king himself, alive, will receive a noble title and lands." The courtyard erupted in excited murmurs. 10 gold crowns was more money than most servants saw in a lifetime. A noble title meant everything. Freedom from hunger, from beatings, from the constant threat of being sold or discarded. Anya's fingers dug into the rough stone behind her. Something felt rehearsed about Corwin's grief, like a mummer performing a role he'd practiced in secret. And that detail about the king's latest retreat. Edward had indeed been riding into the forest more frequently in recent months, but calling it a retreat suggested weakness, instability. Corwin was poisoning his brother's reputation even as he pretended to mourn. "What about slaves?" The voice came from near the blacksmith's forge. Anya's stomach clenched as she recognized Marcus, one of the stable hands who'd been sold to the crown the same year she had. "If a slave finds the king, do they get freedom?" The courtyard fell silent. Corwin's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. "Any person, regardless of station, who returns my brother alive, will be granted their heart's desire within reason. I swear this on the crown itself." Lies. Anya could taste them like copper on her tongue. Corwin wouldn't free a slave who rescued Edward. He'd find a reason to take credit himself, or ensure the slave met with an accident before they could claim their reward. She'd seen enough of politics through stable walls to understand that powerful men didn't keep promises to people they considered property. But that howl that made her bones ache with recognition. Gerard grabbed her arm suddenly, his fingers digging in just above the whip cut. "You, the Duke wants to see you." Anya's heart stopped. In 13 years of invisibility, she'd never been summoned by anyone above the stable master. Being noticed was dangerous. Being noticed by Corwin was potentially fatal. "Move, girl." Gerard dragged her across the courtyard, and Anya felt every eye turn toward her. The strange slave. The one who'd been found living with wolves. The one who made horses obey without voice or whip. She kept her gaze locked on the ground, but her peripheral vision caught the pointing fingers, the whispered speculations. Corwin descended from the platform as they approached, and up close Anya could see the calculation in his expression. He studied her the way a merchant studied livestock, assessing value, identifying weakness, determining use. "This is the one?" he asked Gerard. "Yes, my lord." Anya. She was found in the Forest of Howls 16 years past, living wild. Some say she was raised by wolves, though I don't put stock in such tales. Gerard's tone suggested he absolutely put stock in such tales and found them deeply disturbing. 16 years, Corwin repeated softly. His eyes narrowed. "That would make you, 24 years old now?" Anya nodded once, her throat too tight for words. 24 years since the soldiers came, 16 years since she'd been captured, 13 years of silence and survival. "I've heard interesting things about you," Corwin continued, circling her slowly like a predator. "Horses that kick every other handler. become docile in your presence. Dogs that won't stop barking fall silent when you enter a room. Even the hunting hawks in the mews settle when you walk past their perches. He paused directly in front of her, forcing her to look up. Tell me, Anya, do you remember the forest? Do you remember living there? Every instinct screamed at her to lie, to shake her head, to give him nothing. But something in his expression told her he already knew the answer, that this conversation was a test, and failing meant something worse than a whip across her shoulders. Yes. Her voice came out barely above a whisper, unused and rough. And if I sent you into that forest to find my brother, would you survive? Would the beasts leave you be? Anya's mind raced. This was a trap. It had to be a trap. Corwin didn't want Edward found. That much was obvious in the way he'd phrased his announcement, in the careful poison he'd dripped into every mention of the king's instability. If she agreed to search, she'd either fail and be punished for wasting his time, or succeed and become a liability that knew too much. But that howl that meant the old gray wolf was still alive, still in the forest, still calling for her after all these years. I would survive, she said quietly, but I'm property of the crown. I have no right to claim any reward. Corwin's smile widened, and Anya's stomach turned to ice. Perceptive. I like that. He gestured to one of his guards. Bring the papers. The guard produced a rolled parchment sealed with wax. Corwin broke the seal and unrolled it with theatrical flair. This is a writ of conditional freedom. If you enter the Forest of Howls and return within 30 days with verifiable proof of my brother's fate, alive or dead, you will be granted full liberty and a purse of 50 silver coins, enough to start a new life anywhere in the kingdom. He held out a quill. All you need to do is make your mark. 50 silver coins was generous, too generous. Anya stared at the parchment. At the careful legal language she couldn't read but could sense like poison in honey. There would be a clause, something buried in the formal words that would give Corwin an excuse to void the agreement or ensure her silence permanently. But the alternative was staying here, growing old in the stables, dying with Gerard's whip across her back and the weight of 16 years of silence crushing her chest. And that howl, that impossible, beautiful, terrifying howl. Anya took the quill. Her hand trembled as she made her mark. Not an X like most illiterate slaves, but a specific symbol she'd carved into trees during her years in the forest. A wolf's paw print. Corwin's eyes flickered with something that might have been recognition or might have been satisfaction. You leave at dawn tomorrow. I'll have supplies prepared. He leaned close enough that she could smell the wine on his breath. And Anya, when you find my brother, you should know that the Forest of Howls has been active lately. 3 hunters have disappeared in the past month, 2 merchants, and several villagers have reported seeing unusual wolf activity, larger packs than normal, more aggressive behavior. His smile never reached his eyes. Some say there's an old she-wolf leading them, gray as winter stone with a scar across her muzzle. Anya's world tilted. He knew. Somehow, impossibly, Duke Corwin knew about the wolf that had raised her. Bring back my brother, Corwin said softly. Or don't come back at all. Anya didn't sleep that night. She sat in the corner of the slaves' quarters with her back against the cold stone wall, watching the other bodies shift and breathe in the darkness. Her fingers traced the scar on her left forearm. 3 parallel lines where a young wolf had accidentally clawed her during play when she was 9 years old. The memory came with startling clarity. The sting of broken skin, her childish tears, and the way the old gray wolf had gently licked the wound clean while making soft rumbling sounds that meant comfort, that meant family. The other slaves gave her a wide berth. They always had. Tonight, their avoidance felt even more pronounced, as if they could smell the forest on her already, as if they recognized that she was no longer truly one of them. Perhaps she never had been. Just before dawn, a guard arrived with her supplies, a leather satchel containing dried meat, hard bread, a water skin, a small knife for eating, and a thick wool cloak. No weapons, no map. Nothing that would allow her to defend herself or find her way if she chose to run rather than search. The message was clear. Corwin expected her to fail, or expected her to never return. The forest waited at the kingdom's northern edge, a dark mass of ancient oaks and twisted pines that seemed to swallow the morning light. Anya stood at its border as the sun crept over the castle walls behind her, and for the first time in 13 years, she allowed herself to breathe deeply. The air tasted different here, green and alive and wild, nothing like the hay dust and manure scent of the stables. Her body responded before her mind could catch up, her shoulders relaxing, her heartbeat slowing to match some rhythm she'd forgotten she knew. She entered the tree line without looking back. The forest closed around her like a mother's embrace. Within minutes, the castle sounds faded to nothing, replaced by the whisper of wind through leaves and the distant call of a crow. Anya's feet found animal paths without conscious thought, her body remembering the way to move through undergrowth without snapping branches or disturbing the natural quiet. She was taller now than she'd been at 11, but the knowledge lived in her muscles, in the way her weight distributed across each step, in the angle of her head as she listened to the forest's voice. She walked for 3 hours before she found the first sign. A tree with claw marks at shoulder height, too high for any normal wolf, but exactly right for one standing on hind legs to mark territory. The scratches were fresh, no more than 2 days old. Anya pressed her palm against them and closed her eyes, feeling the grain of disturbed bark, the depth of marks made by claws she would recognize anywhere. "I'm here," she whispered to the empty forest. "I heard you." The response came not as sound but as sensation, a shift in the air pressure, a change in the quality of silence. Anya opened her eyes and found herself surrounded by 6 wolves. They'd approached without sound, materializing from the shadows like smoke given form. 5 were young, perhaps 2 or 3 years old, their coats healthy and their eyes bright with curiosity and caution. But the 6th, the one standing slightly ahead of the others, made Anya's throat close with emotion so sharp it felt like swallowing glass. The old gray wolf was massive, far larger than any wolf should be after so many years. Her muzzle bore the same distinctive scar, a pale line running from her nose to just below her left eye, a mark she'd earned fighting a bear when Anya was still small enough to ride on her back. But age had settled into her frame. Her movements were stiff, her breathing slightly labored, and when she met Anya's gaze, there was a depth of exhaustion there that spoke of a creature holding on through sheer will alone. Anya dropped to her knees. She didn't think about it, didn't plan it. Her body simply folded, driven by something deeper than thought. The wolf approached slowly, each step deliberate, and when she reached Anya, she pressed her scarred muzzle against Anya's face in a gesture of recognition so tender that Anya finally broke. The sobs came from somewhere she'd kept locked away for 16 years. She wrapped her arms around the wolf's thick neck and cried into her fur, breathing in the scent that meant safety, that meant home, that meant the only unconditional love she'd ever known. The wolf stood, perfectly still, bearing Anya's weight, making that same rumbling sound she'd made when Anya was a frightened 8-year-old child who'd watched her family die. "You're alive," Anya gasped against the wolf's fur. "You're alive, and you shouldn't be. Wolves don't live this long. You should have been gone years ago." The wolf pulled back and looked at Anya with eyes that held far too much understanding. Then she turned and began walking deeper into the forest. The message was clear. Follow. The younger wolves fell into formation around Anya, 2 ahead, 3 behind, creating a protective formation that made her chest tighten. They were treating her like pack, like she belonged. After 13 years of being property, of being less than human in the eyes of those who owned her, these wolves were offering her a place in their hierarchy without hesitation. They walked for another 2 hours, moving deeper into the forest than Anya had ever ventured even during her wild years. The trees grew, denser here, their trunks twisted with age, their branches forming a canopy so thick that midday looked like dusk. The air smelled of moss and decay and something else, something metallic that made Anya's instincts scream danger. The old gray wolf stopped at the edge of a small ravine. Below, Barely visible through the underbrush, Anya could see the dark entrance to what looked like a cave or hollowed-out space beneath a massive fallen oak. And there, lying motionless in the shadows, was a man. Even from this distance, even in the dim light, Anya recognized the quality of his clothing. Fine wool and leather, now torn and stained, but unmistakably noble. His dark hair was matted with dirt and blood, and one of his legs was bent at an angle that made her stomach turn. But he was breathing. She could see his chest rising and falling in shallow, irregular movements. King Edward, alive but badly injured, hidden in the forest and guarded by wolves. Anya's mind reeled. How long had he been here? How had he survived? And why were the wolves protecting him instead of leaving him to die or finishing him off? Wolves were opportunistic. An injured human should have been easy prey, especially for a pack this size. The old gray wolf made a soft chuffing sound and started down the ravine's slope. The other wolves remained at the top, clearly standing guard. The message was obvious. Anya was meant to follow, to see the king up close, to understand something that words couldn't explain. Anya descended carefully, her hands finding purchase on roots and rocks, her body remembering how to navigate difficult terrain. As she got closer to the fallen oak, she could see more details. Someone, or something, had dragged the king into this sheltered spot. There were scraps of fabric that looked like they'd been used to staunch bleeding. A small pool of collected rainwater within reach of where he lay. Signs of care, of intention to keep him alive. The old gray wolf settled beside the unconscious king, her body pressed against his side in a position that would share body heat. She looked up at Anya and made a sound, not quite a whine, not quite a growl, but something that conveyed urgency and pleading and command all at once. Anya knelt beside them, her hands trembling as she reached toward the king's throat to check for a pulse. His skin was hot with fever, his breathing raspy and wet. Up close, she could see the extent of his injuries, a deep gash across his forehead that had stopped. Bleeding but was clearly infected, massive bruising across his ribs, and that leg, definitely broken, possibly shattered. And then the king's eyes opened. They were gray, the same shade as winter clouds, and for a moment they focused on nothing. But then they found Anya's face, and something flickered in their depths. Confusion, pain, and something that looked horrifyingly like recognition. "Please," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Don't let him find me. Don't let my brother." He coughed, and blood flecked his lips. "He'll kill me. He's been poisoning me for months. I finally realized. Had to run, but the horse threw me and..." His eyes rolled back and he went limp again. Anya sat frozen, her hand still on his throat, feeling the rapid, thready pulse. Poisoning. Corwin had been poisoning the king, and Edward had fled into the forest to escape his own brother's murder attempt, only to be injured and found by the same wolf who'd saved Anya 16 years ago, the old gray. Wolf looked at Anya with eyes that held the weight of impossible decisions. She'd kept this man alive for 3 days, maybe more. She'd protected him, warmed him, probably even brought him water in her mouth. She'd called Anya here across impossible distance, and Anya had no idea why. Anya's hands moved without conscious direction, her fingers peeling back the torn fabric of Edward's tunic to examine the wounds beneath. The gash across his ribs was deep enough to expose bone in places, and the infection radiating from it burned hot enough that she could feel the heat rising from his skin. The fever was eating him alive from the inside. Without treatment, real treatment, not just forest remedies, he'd be dead within 2 days, maybe 3. The old gray wolf watched her with an intensity that made Anya's chest ache. There was expectation in that gaze, and something deeper. Trust. The wolf was trusting her to save this man, and that trust felt like a physical weight pressing down on Anya's shoulders. "I don't understand," Anya whispered, her voice cracking. "Why him? Why protect him? He's..." She couldn't finish the sentence. "He's human. He's one of them. He's wearing the colors of the crown that owns me." The wolf made that rumbling sound again and shifted closer to Edward, her scarred muzzle nudging his shoulder with surprising gentleness. And then she did something that stopped Anya's breath entirely. The wolf looked directly at Edward's face, then at Anya, then back to Edward. Then she lowered her head and very deliberately licked the infected wound on his ribs, not cleaning it, but marking it, drawing Anya's attention to it. She was communicating. After all these years, the old gray wolf still remembered how to bridge the gap between animal and human understanding. She was asking Anya to heal him. "I can't bring him back to the castle," Anya said, and the words felt like confession. "Corwin sent me to find him, but not to save him. If I return with Edward alive, Corwin will finish what he started. He wants the throne. He's been planning this." Her throat tightened. "And I'm a slave. Even with that writ of freedom, even with proof, Corwin will find a way to silence me. We both know how this ends." The wolf's eyes didn't waver. She huffed once, sharp, decisive, and stood. With movements that spoke of age and pain, she walked to the entrance of the hollow and looked back at Anya expectantly. The younger wolves above responded immediately, their silhouettes appearing at the ravine's edge. Anya's mind raced. The wolf wanted her to stay here, to tend Edward in this hidden place, protected by the pack. But staying meant abandoning her only chance at freedom. Corwin's writ gave her 30 days. If she didn't return by then, she'd be hunted as a runaway slave. The punishment for that was death, usually preceded by torture as an example to others. Edward groaned, his head turning fitfully. In his delirium, words tumbled out, fragmented, desperate. The wine, always the wine. Corwin watching me drink, smiling. Months of getting weaker. Couldn't think straight. Advisors stopped trusting me. Everyone thought I was losing my mind. His eyes snapped open, suddenly lucid, fixing on Anya with frightening intensity. "You're not one of Corwin's. You're clothes. You're a servant." "Slave," Anya corrected quietly, "from the stables." Something shifted in Edward's expression, pain that had nothing to do with his physical injuries. A slave. He closed his eyes. "Of course, my brother would send someone expendable, someone who can't refuse." His breathing hitched. "Did he tell you to kill me if you found me alive? To make it look like the wolves finished the job?" The question hung in the air like poison gas. Anya thought about Corwin's smile, about the theatrical generosity of his offer, about the careful way he'd mentioned the wolf with the scarred muzzle. He'd known she'd find Edward. He'd known the wolves wouldn't harm her. He'd sent her here, expecting her to either fail and die, or succeed and become a liability that needed eliminating. "He gave me conditional freedom," Anya said. 30 days to bring back proof of your fate. 50 silver coins and liberty if I succeed." Edward laughed, a horrible wet sound that ended in coughing. "Proof of my fate. Not me alive, just proof." Blood leaked from the corner of his mouth. "He's clever, my brother. Always has been. Sends a slave who has everything to gain from my death and nothing to gain from my survival." His gray eyes found hers again. "So why haven't you killed me yet?" "A rock to the head would be quick. Tell Corwin the wolves got to me first. Take your freedom." The words hit like physical blows because he was right. Every logical part of Anya's mind screamed that this was the smart choice. Edward was dying anyway. His leg was destroyed, the infection was spreading, and even if she somehow got him back to the castle alive, Corwin would just poison him again, saving him. Accomplished nothing except ensuring her own death. But the old gray wolf pressed against her side, warm and solid and alive when she should have been dust and bones years ago. And in that touch, Anya felt the echo of every moment the wolf had chosen her life over easier prey. Every time she'd brought food when Anya was too small to hunt, every time she'd placed her body between Anya and danger, every impossible choice made out of something that transcended survival. "I don't know," Anya admitted, and the honesty felt like bleeding out. "I don't know why she saved you. I don't know why she called me here, but she's asking me to help you and I—" Her voice broke. "I owe her everything. She raised me when I should have died. She loved me when I was nothing but a burden. So if she wants you alive, then I have to try." Edward stared at her for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he smiled, small and sad and genuine. "You were one of the forest children, the ones in the stories." His eyes drifted to the old gray wolf. "I heard rumors. A girl found living with wolves, sold to the crown. I never believed it was real." He coughed again, weaker this time. "What's your name?" "Anya." "Anya." He tested the word like it mattered. "I'm Edward, though I suppose you know that." His hand moved slightly, trembling with effort, reaching toward the wolf. The old gray leaned forward just enough that his fingers brushed her scarred muzzle. "She's beautiful, ancient. I've never seen a wolf live this long." His eyes slid back to Anya. "How old were you when she found you?" 8. The number came out before Anya could stop it, and with it, a flood of memory she'd kept locked away. "Soldiers came to my village. They were collecting taxes, but my father didn't have enough coin. They decided to take payment another way." Her hands clenched into fists. "They killed my parents, my brother, burned our cottage. I ran into the forest because I was small enough to escape through a broken wall." Edward's face had gone gray beneath the fever flush. "What village?" "Millbrook, 16 years ago. Early spring." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the forest seemed to hold its breath. Edward's eyes had gone distant, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. "I was there. I led that tax collection." His hands began to shake. "I was 22 years old. My father had just died, and I was trying to prove I could be strong, could be the king the realm needed. My advisors said villages were withholding taxes, that I needed to make an example." Tears leaked from the corners of his eyes. "Millbrook was my first. I gave the order to use force if necessary. I told my men to collect the debts by any means required." Anya's world tilted. The ground beneath her felt unstable, reality fragmenting into pieces that no longer fit together. The man dying in front of her wasn't just a random noble, wasn't just a king fleeing his brother's treachery. He was the reason. Her mother's blood had soaked into their cottage floor. The reason her father's last words had been screams. The reason she'd spent 3 years living more animal than human. "You," she breathed, and the word carried 16 years of grief and rage and loss. "You killed them." Edward didn't look away, didn't make excuses. "Yes, not with my own hands, but the order was mine. The responsibility is mine." His voice steadied with effort. "I've spent 16 years trying to atone, changing laws, protecting villages, but it doesn't bring them back. Doesn't undo what I did." He met her eyes. "So if you want to kill me, Anya from Millbrook, you'd be justified. Take your revenge. I won't fight you." The old gray wolf made a sound, sharp, commanding. She moved between them, her body a barrier, her eyes locked on Anya with an expression that was unmistakably a warning. "Don't. Whatever you're thinking, don't." Anya's hands trembled with the weight of choice. She could press her hand over Edward's mouth and nose, could leave him here to die slowly from infection, could take his signet ring back to Corwin as proof and claim her freedom drenched in the blood of the man who'd destroyed her childhood. But the old gray wolf was asking her to save him. The creature who'd taught her that survival didn't have to mean cruelty, that strength could coexist with gentleness, was begging her to choose mercy over justice. And Anya realized with crushing clarity that she didn't know which choice would destroy her more. Anya's hands shook as she opened her leather satchel and pulled out the dried meat. The old gray wolf watched her carefully, that ancient scarred face holding an expression Anya had seen countless times during her years in the forest, patient expectation. The wolf knew she'd made her choice before Anya fully understood it herself. 16 years of separation hadn't erased the language they'd once shared. "I need to set his leg first," Anya said, speaking more to herself than anyone else. "The infection in his ribs will kill him within days, but if the bone sets wrong, he'll never walk again. Not that it matters if—" She cut herself off. Thinking about outcomes meant thinking about choices she wasn't ready to face. Edward had slipped back into unconsciousness, which was a mercy. What Anya needed to do next would be excruciating, even with the fever dulling his senses. She'd watched the wolf pack handle injuries during her forest years, had seen how they'd immobilize broken limbs using their own bodies as splints, how they'd lick wounds clean despite the victim's struggles. Nature was efficient but never gentle. She gathered straight branches from the surrounding area, testing each one for strength and flexibility. The younger wolves watched from above, their eyes tracking her movements with unnerving intelligence. One of them, a lean female with unusual amber eyes, descended the ravine slope and dropped a thick piece of bark near Anya's feet. It was almost perfectly flat, ideal for use as a splint backing. Anya stared at the wolf, her throat tight. "You understand what I'm doing?" The amber-eyed wolf tilted her head, then returned to her position above. The old gray wolf huffed softly, a sound that somehow conveyed approval and urgency in equal measure. Time was bleeding away. Edward's breathing had become more labored, his fever climbing higher with each passing hour. Anya positioned herself beside his shattered leg, her hands hovering over the grotesque angle of broken bone. She'd need to pull it straight, align the fragments, bind them tightly enough to hold, but not so tight that she cut off blood flow. She'd seen hunters in the castle do this once, and the man had screamed so loudly that servants 3 floors away heard him. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though she didn't know if she was apologizing for the pain she was about to cause or for something far deeper. "This is going to hurt." She gripped his ankle with both hands and pulled. The sound of bone grinding against bone made her stomach heave, but she forced herself to maintain pressure, feeling for the moment when the fragments would align. Edward's eyes flew open and he screamed, raw, animalistic, a sound of pure agony that echoed through the forest and sent birds exploding from nearby trees. The old gray wolf immediately pressed her body across Edward's chest, pinning him down with her considerable weight. Her scarred muzzle pushed against his face in a gesture that was somehow both restraint and comfort. Edward's hands clutched at her fur, his screams dissolving into broken sobs. Anya worked quickly, her fingers finding the alignment point more by instinct than knowledge. She grabbed the bark splint and positioned it along the outside of his leg, then began binding it with strips torn from her own undershirt. Her hands remembered skills she'd thought forgotten, the way to wrap injuries so they'd hold through movement, the tension required to stabilize without strangling. By the time she finished, Edward had passed out again, his face gray and slick with sweat. The old gray wolf released her pin and stepped back, her own breathing labored from the effort. She was too old for this kind of physical exertion. Anya could see it in the way her legs trembled, in the careful way she lowered herself to rest. "You're dying too," Anya said softly, the realization hitting her with devastating clarity. "That's why you called me. Not just for him. You're dying and you knew it." The wolf's eyes met hers, and in their depths, Anya saw acknowledgement. The old gray had held on far longer than nature intended, her body sustained by nothing but will and purpose. Now that Anya was here, now that the human she'd been protecting had someone to care for him, the wolf could finally let go. "No." The word came out fierce, desperate. "No, you don't get to leave me again. I just found you. You can't." But even as she spoke, Anya knew it was futile. The wolf had already made her choice, had probably made it months ago when she'd first found Edward injured in the forest. Anya turned her attention to Edward's infected wounds, forcing herself to focus on immediate problems rather than the impossible grief building in her chest. She used her eating knife to cut away the putrid flesh around his rib gash, working by touch and instinct. The smell of infection was overwhelming, sweet and rotten, the scent of flesh dying from the inside. She packed the wound with moss she'd soaked in rainwater, remembering how the wolf pack had used similar methods to draw out poison. "Tell me about Millbrook." Edward's voice was weak, thready, but conscious. His gray eyes were open, fixed on her face. "Tell me about your family. I need to know what I destroyed." Anya's hands stilled. Why? So you can feel worse about dying? So I can understand who's keeping me alive when they have every reason to let me die. Edward coughed, his whole body convulsing. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. You said you had a brother. What was his name? Thomas. The name felt strange on her tongue after so many years. He was 12. He wanted to be a blacksmith. He used to make me toys out of bent nails and scrap metal. Her throat closed. Your soldiers dragged him out of our cottage by his hair. I watched from the wall crack. He fought them. He was 12 years old and he tried to fight grown men in armor. Edward's eyes closed. I remember. My captain reported a boy who resisted. They made an example of him in front of the other villagers. His voice cracked. I commended them for their efficiency. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Anya's hands clenched around the moss, water dripping between her fingers. He was 12 years old. I know. Edward's eyes opened again, and there were tears streaming down his temples into his hair. I know, and I can't undo it. Can't bring him back. Can't give you back your childhood or your family, or the 16 years you spent as a slave because of my orders. He drew a shuddering breath. But I can tell you that I remember, that I've carried it, that every village I've protected since then, every unjust law I've overturned, every tax I've reduced, it's all been an attempt to balance scales that can never be balanced. And it's not enough. It will never be enough. The old gray wolf made a sound, low, rumbling, almost like a growl but softer. She moved between them again. But this time she didn't position herself as a barrier. Instead, she pressed first against Anya, then against Edward, forcing them physically closer together. Her message was clear. Whatever history lay between them, whatever pain and guilt and rage, she wanted them to coexist. She wanted them to survive together. Why? Anya's voice broke. Why do you care if he lives? He's human. Humans killed wolves, took their forest, hunted them for sport. Why protect one? The wolf's eyes held an answer Anya could feel but not articulate. It was something about the quality of Edward's suffering when she'd found him, about the way he'd whispered apologies in his delirium, about how he'd tried to push her away to safety even when he was dying. The wolf had recognized something in him that transcended species. Genuine remorse, the kind that ate a creature alive from the inside. Edward reached out slowly, his hand trembling with effort, and touched Anya's wrist just above where the wolf claw scars marked her skin. I don't deserve your mercy, but if you're giving it anyway, I need you to know, if I survive this, if by some miracle we both get out of this forest alive, I will spend whatever time I have left making sure you're free, truly free. Not Corwin's conditional freedom, but the kind that can't be taken away. His fingers pressed weakly against her scars. I can't give you back your family, but I can give you the choice to build a new life, whatever that looks like. Anya stared at him. This broken king who'd destroyed her world and was now offering to rebuild it from ashes. She thought about the easy choice, leaving him here, taking his ring, claiming her freedom through his death. She thought about justice and revenge and all the ways one could define what was owed. But then the old gray wolf leaned heavily against her shoulder, and Anya felt the irregular heartbeat beneath that ancient fur, felt the way the wolf's breathing had become labored and painful. She'd spent 3 years watching this creature choose the harder path again and again, choosing to feed a human child instead of her own pack, choosing to teach instead of abandon, choosing love when survival would have been simpler. I'll keep you alive, Anya said finally, the words feeling like a wound opening. Not because I forgive you, not because I think you've atoned, but because she's asking me to, and I owe her more than I owe my anger. She pulled her wrist from his grip. But when? This is over. When we're out of this forest, you're going to help me find out what happened to the other families from Millbrook, the ones who survived, and you're going to make it right. Edward nodded, something like relief flooding his face. I will. I swear it. The old gray wolf settled between them, her body a bridge connecting two people who should have been enemies, and closed her eyes. In the failing light, surrounded by the younger wolves standing guard above, they formed an impossible tableau: a dying king, a slave with every reason to hate him, and an ancient wolf who'd decided that mercy mattered more than justice. Somewhere in the distance, a branch snapped. The younger wolves' heads swiveled as one, their ears pricked forward, bodies gone tense. Someone else was in the forest, and they were getting closer. The younger wolves vanished into the undergrowth without sound, their bodies melting into shadows like they'd never existed. Only the old gray wolf remained visible, her ears flat against her skull, a low rumble building in her chest that Anya felt more than heard. Whatever was approaching wasn't friendly. Anya pressed herself against the inner wall of the hollow, her hand instinctively covering Edward's mouth even though he was barely conscious. His fever had climbed higher, his skin burning hot enough that she could feel the heat radiating through his clothes. If he made noise now, if he cried out in delirium, they'd be discovered immediately. The footsteps came closer, heavy boots crushing dried leaves, the occasional snap of twigs, the rustle of someone pushing through dense brush. Whoever it was wasn't trying to be quiet. They were either supremely confident or supremely stupid, and Anya suspected the former. Only someone with significant backup would move through the forest of howls so carelessly. A man's voice cut through the forest quiet. "I know you're out here, slave. Duke Corwin said you had 5 days to prove yourself before he sent someone to check on your progress. Generous of him, really. Most nobles wouldn't have bothered." A pause, then a dark chuckle. "Though between you and me, I don't think he expects you to succeed. I think he expects to find your corpse half-eaten by wolves. Makes the paperwork simpler." Anya recognized the voice. Marcus, one of Corwin's personal guards. She'd seen him in the stables occasionally, always watching the female servants with eyes that made her skin crawl. He was the kind of man who enjoyed his work a little too much, especially when that work involved causing pain. "But here's the interesting thing," Marcus continued, his voice growing closer. "We found tracks, human tracks, leading deep into the forest, and wolf tracks all around them. Lots of wolf tracks, like they were escorting someone rather than hunting them." Another pause. "Now that's unusual, isn't it? Almost like the stories about you are true. Almost like you really do have some unnatural connection with beasts." The old gray wolf's rumble deepened. Anya felt the vibration through her own chest where they pressed together, felt the way the wolf's ancient body was coiling with tension despite her age and exhaustion. She was preparing to fight, to defend, and Anya knew with sick certainty that the wolf wouldn't survive an encounter with an armed guard. Edward's eyes flickered open, consciousness returning at the worst possible moment. His gaze found Anya's face, then tracked to the wolf, then registered the danger with startling clarity. His hand moved slowly, carefully, reaching for the eating knife still tucked into Anya's belt. She caught his wrist and shook her head sharply. He was in no condition to fight. The fever had stolen his strength, and his broken leg meant he couldn't even stand. But Edward's eyes were insistent. He mouthed words Anya could barely read in the dim light. "Let me help. I'm going to make you an offer, slave," Marcus called out, his voice now disturbingly close. "Duke Corwin is a practical man. He understands that sometimes plans need adjustment. So here's the new deal. You bring me to the king, alive or dead, and I'll make sure your writ of freedom is honored. You'll get your 50 silver coins and your liberty. But if you make me search this entire cursed forest myself, well, accidents happen, especially to runaway slaves who got lost and never found their way home." Anya's mind raced. Marcus knew she'd found something. The tracks had told him that much. But he didn't know exactly where they were. Didn't know if Edward was alive or dead. Didn't know about the wolf pack that had already marked him as a threat. She had minutes, maybe less, to make a choice that would determine whether any of them survived the next hour. The old gray wolf shifted, her body language changing from defensive to something else. She looked at Anya with those ancient eyes, and in them, Anya saw a question. A request. Permission. No. Anya breathed, understanding immediately what the wolf intended. You can't. You're too old. You're dying. You can't. But the wolf was already moving, pulling herself to her feet with visible effort, stepping toward the hollow's entrance. She was going to draw Marcus away, going to sacrifice herself to buy Anya and Edward time. Anya grabbed for her, fingers sinking into thick fur, trying to hold her back. But the wolf turned her head and did something she'd never done before. She growled at Anya. Not a warning, not playful, but a true growl of dominance. Back down. Let me do this. This is my choice. Tears blurred Anya's vision. Please, not like this. Not for him. The wolf's expression softened. She leaned forward and pressed her scarred muzzle against Anya's forehead. The same gesture she'd made thousands of times during those 3 years in the forest. The gesture that meant, I love you, you are Pack, you are mine. Then she pulled away and limped toward the entrance. Edward's hand caught Anya's arm. When she looked at him, she saw tears streaming down his fever-flushed face. Stop her, he whispered desperately. Please, not for me. I'm not worth. She's not doing it for you. Anya cut him off, her voice raw. She's doing it for me. Because if Marcus finds us, he'll kill me too. She's always protected me. Even now, even dying. The old gray wolf reached the hollow's entrance and paused, silhouetted against the filtered forest light. For a moment, she was young again. Powerful. And whole. The alpha female who'd commanded respect from every creature in the forest. Then she howled, long and mournful and defiant, a sound that spoke of 16 years of impossible love and the cost of choosing mercy over survival. Marcus's voice responded immediately. There. I knew it. The wolves are protecting something. His footsteps crashed through undergrowth, moving away from the hollow, following the sound. The old gray wolf looked back one final time. Her eyes found Anya's, and in that gaze was everything they'd never been able to say in words. Thank you for surviving. Thank you for growing strong. Thank you for being worth saving. I would do it all again. Then she was gone, moving slowly but deliberately, leading Marcus deeper into the forest where the younger wolves waited, drawing the danger away from the 2 broken humans she'd chosen to protect. Anya buried her face in her hands, her whole body shaking with silent sobs. Edward's arm wrapped around her shoulders, weak, trembling. But there. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry, this is my fault. All of it. If I hadn't… Shut up, Anya choked out. Just shut up. You don't get to apologize for this. You don't get to make this about your guilt. They sat in silence, broken only by Edward's labored breathing and the distant sounds of Marcus crashing through the forest. Then, carried on the wind like a knife to the heart, came the sound of steel meeting flesh, a wolf's yelp of pain, and Marcus's triumphant shout. Got one! Biggest damn wolf I've ever seen! Gray as stone with a scar across its… His voice cut off abruptly, replaced by screaming, human screaming. The younger wolves had ambushed him, but mixed with Marcus's screams was another sound, the pained whimpering of a mortally wounded wolf. The old gray had bought them time, but the cost was exactly what Anya had feared. Edward pulled Anya closer, despite his weakness. We have to move. When Marcus doesn't report back, Corwin will send more. Guards, we have maybe a day, 2 at most. He coughed, blood flecking his lips. I can't walk. My leg is… I know. Anya wiped her eyes roughly, forcing herself to think through the grief. The younger wolves. They'll help us. They're still out there. She looked at Edward, at this man who'd destroyed her life and was now caught in the wreckage alongside her. Can you ride on a wolf's back if I stabilize you? Edward stared at her like she'd suggested flying. That's impossible. Wolves don't… These wolves do. Anya stood, her legs unsteady, her heart shattered but her mind crystallizing around what needed to happen next. She taught them to trust me, to protect what I protect. She looked toward the hollow entrance where the old gray wolf had disappeared. And right now, what I'm protecting is you, because she asked me to. because she died for it. The screaming in the distance had stopped. The forest had gone unnaturally quiet. Then, emerging from the shadows like ghosts, came 4 of the younger wolves. They were bloodied but alive, their muzzles dark with gore. And behind them, limping badly but moving under her own power, came the old gray wolf. Anya's breath caught. The wolf was alive, barely, impossibly alive, with a deep gash across her shoulder and another along her ribs, but alive. She collapsed near the hollow entrance, her breathing ragged, her eyes already glazing with the nearness of death. Anya was beside her in an instant, her hands hovering over wounds she had no way to treat. No, you survived. You're here. You can't. The wolf's eyes focused on her with effort. Then slowly, deliberately, the old gray wolf looked at Edward, then back at Anya, then at the younger wolves gathered around them. Her message was clear even as life bled out of her. Take him, keep him safe, finish what I started. This matters. I don't want to, Anya sobbed, her hands pressed against the wolf's scarred muzzle. I don't want any of this. I just want you. I just want to go back to when it was simple. But the old gray wolf's eyes were already closing, her breathing slowing to something peaceful and final. Her last act was to rest her head in Anya's lap, the same way she'd done countless times when Anya was a frightened child. And then, between one breath and the next, she was gone. The forest held its breath. The younger wolves sat in a circle around them, heads bowed in acknowledgement of their fallen alpha. Edward watched in silence, tears streaming freely, bearing witness to a love he'd never fully understand. And Anya held the body of the only mother she'd truly known, and made a choice that felt like self-destruction. She would keep Edward alive, not because she forgave him, not because she thought he deserved it, but because the wolf who'd saved her life had used her last breath to ask for this one impossible thing. They buried the old gray wolf at dawn, in a clearing where morning light broke through the canopy in golden shafts that looked like heaven reaching down. Anya dug the grave with her bare hands, refusing Edward's weakly offered help, refusing everything except the physical pain of torn fingernails and bleeding palms. The younger wolves sat in silent vigil, their bodies forming a protective circle around the ritual that belonged to neither fully human nor fully wild. Edward watched from where Anya had propped him against a tree trunk, his broken leg splinted and his fever finally beginning to break after 2 days of desperate nursing. He'd stopped trying to apologize. Anya had made it clear that his words meant nothing here, that this grief was hers alone and he was merely a witness to it, an obligation she was fulfilling because a dying wolf had asked her to. When the grave was deep enough, Anya lifted the old gray wolf's body with strength that surprised her. The wolf seemed lighter than she should be, as if death had already begun stealing her substance. Anya laid her carefully in the earth, arranging her limbs so she looked peaceful, so she looked like she was only sleeping. Then she placed her hand on the scarred muzzle one final time. You saved me twice, Anya whispered. Once when I was 8 and should have died in the forest, and again when I was 24 and had forgotten how to be anything except a thing people owned. Her throat closed. I don't know how to be without you. I don't know who I am if I'm not the girl you chose to love. The amber-eyed wolf, the one who'd brought the bark splint, moved closer and pressed against Anya's side. The gesture was unmistakable. You are still Pack. You are still ours. The loss of an alpha doesn't erase what she built. Anya buried the wolf as the sun climbed higher, each handful of earth feeling like she was burying parts of herself. When it was done, she sat beside the grave and howled. Not a human scream, but the wolf song she'd learned as a child. The morning call that meant family has fallen, Pack has lost, the world is smaller and colder now. The younger wolves joined her, their voices weaving with hers into a harmony that seemed to make the forest itself shudder with grief. Edward wept openly, and for the first time, Anya didn't resent his tears. He hadn't known the old gray wolf, but he understood loss. He understood the weight of carrying debts that could never be repaid. When the howling finally faded, Anya turned to face the practical horror of what came next. They were 3 days deep into the forest of howls. Edward could barely stay conscious for more than an hour at a time, and Corwin would have already sent more guards to investigate Marcus's disappearance. The writ of conditional freedom gave her 27 more days, but that timeline meant nothing now. She'd killed a Duke's guard, or rather the wolves had, under her direction. That made her guilty of murder regardless of circumstances. "We can't go back," Anya said flatly, speaking to Edward but looking at the younger wolves. "You understand that, right? Even if we somehow reached the castle, Corwin would have us both executed before we could speak." Edward nodded slowly, his gray eyes clearer than they'd been since she found him. "I know. He's probably already declared me dead and taken the throne. By now he's consolidated power, replaced my loyal advisors with his own people." He coughed, wincing. "Everything I built for 16 years, gone in less than a week. Then why keep you alive?" The question came out harsher than Anya intended. "If you're a deposed king with no throne and no power, what's the point? Why did she die for this?" Edward was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made Anya's chest tighten. "Because I know things. About Corwin, about the kingdom's vulnerabilities, about where loyalists might still be hiding." He looked at her directly. "And because, despite everything I've done wrong, I'm still the legitimate king. Blood right matters in this kingdom. As long as I'm alive, Corwin's claim is contested. He can declare me dead, but without a body, there will always be doubt." "So you're a symbol?" Anya's laugh was bitter. "A living, breathing problem for your brother. That's what she died protecting. A political inconvenience." "No." Edward's voice hardened despite his weakness. "She died protecting the possibility of justice. If I live long enough to reach the eastern provinces where my mother's family still holds influence, I can challenge Corwin's rule. I can bring to light what he's done, the poisoning, the murders, the corruption." He paused. "And I can make sure the truth about Millbrook and every other village I destroyed gets told. Publicly. With consequences." Anya stared at him, this broken king promising impossible redemptions. "And how exactly do we reach the eastern provinces?" "You can't walk. I'm a runaway slave with a murder charge. We have 4 wolves and whatever supplies I can scavenge from the forest." The amber-eyed wolf made a soft chuffing sound and stood. She moved to Edward's side and lowered herself carefully, positioning her body parallel to him. The meaning was unmistakable. She would carry him. Edward looked at the wolf with something like awe. She understands. They all understand. He reached out slowly, letting the wolf sniff his hand before touching her fur. "I've never heard of wolves behaving this way. It's like they're choosing to help rather than being trained." "They're choosing to finish what she started," Anya corrected. "The old gray taught them that I was pack. And apparently you're pack now too, whether I like it or not." She stood, her body aching from grief and exhaustion. "We leave within the hour. The eastern provinces are 2 weeks' travel on foot, longer with your injuries. We'll need to avoid roads, avoid villages, avoid anywhere Corwin's men might be searching." Over the next hour, they prepared with grim efficiency. Anya fashioned a rough harness. From her cloak, binding Edward to the amber-eyed wolf's back in a way that would distribute his weight evenly and keep his broken leg immobilized. The other 3 wolves ranged ahead and behind, forming a protective formation that spoke of intelligence and strategy that should have been impossible. Edward gritted his teeth as they lifted him onto the wolf's back, his face going gray with pain. But once settled, something like wonder crossed his features. "She's so strong. I can feel the power in her muscles." "She's 2 years old," Anya said. "At her prime. She could carry twice your weight if needed." She looked at him seriously. "But if you fall, if the splint breaks, if the infection comes back, I'm not stopping. The wolves and I will keep moving east, and you'll die in the forest alone. Understand?" Edward nodded. "I understand. And Anya, thank you. I know you're not doing this for me, but I'm grateful anyway." They traveled through the day, moving slowly but steadily through the densest parts of the forest where trackers would struggle to follow. The wolves navigated with perfect confidence, leading them through hidden game trails and across streams that would hide their scent. Anya found herself falling into old patterns, reading the forest's signs, identifying edible plants, listening to the language of bird calls that warned of approaching danger. Edward drifted in and out of consciousness, his body jolting with each step the wolf took. But during his lucid moments, he talked, told her about his mother, who'd been from the eastern provinces and had taught him that leadership meant service, not domination. Told her about the guilt that had eaten at him for 16 years, the way he'd see the faces of Millbrooks dead in every feast, every celebration, every moment of peace. Told her about discovering Corwin's poison scheme, the subtle weakening, the way his own advisors had slowly turned against him, thinking he was losing his mind when really his brother was stealing it. "I should have seen it sooner," Edward said during one lucid stretch. "But I trusted him. He was my brother. We'd survived our father's cruelty together. I thought that meant something." Anya, walking beside the amber-eyed wolf, said nothing. She understood betrayal by blood, understood how the people who should protect you could be the ones who destroyed you most completely. As night fell on their first day of travel, they made camp in a hollowed-out tree trunk large enough to shelter Edward and wide enough that the wolves could sleep in a protective circle around them. Anya started a small fire using techniques she'd learned during her wild years, friction and patience and dried moss. Edward watched her work with obvious fascination. "You really were raised by them. This isn't just survival skills you picked up. This is language you speak fluently. More fluently than I speak human language," Anya admitted. She fed small sticks to the growing flame. "I spent 3 years more wolf than girl. When the hunters caught me, I'd forgotten how to use words, forgotten that humans cooked their food. I bit the first person who touched me hard enough to scar him for life. And yet here you are, keeping a human alive, speaking in full sentences, making fire." Edward shifted carefully, trying to find a position that didn't make his legs scream. "You didn't just survive, Anya. You adapted. You learned to exist in both worlds." "I learned to pretend," she corrected. "There's a difference. In the stables, I was property that occasionally made useful sounds. With the wolves, I was pack. I was real." She looked at the amber-eyed wolf who was watching her with those unsettling, intelligent eyes. "Now I don't know what I am." "You're someone who keeps her promises even when they cost everything," Edward said quietly. "You're someone a dying wolf trusted with her final wish. That's not nothing, Anya. That's not pretending." Anya turned away before he could see. The tears. She couldn't afford to fall apart. Not with 2 weeks of dangerous travel ahead, not with Corwin's men surely hunting them, not with 4 wolves depending on her to lead them toward something she wasn't sure existed: safety, justice, a future where any of this made sense. But that night, as she lay between the warmth of wolf bodies and listened to Edward's labored breathing, she allowed herself one moment of weakness. She whispered into the darkness, "I don't know how to do this without you. I don't know how to be strong enough." The amber-eyed wolf shifted closer, pressing her muzzle against Anya's shoulder. And somehow, impossibly, Anya heard the old gray's voice in the gesture. "You were always strong enough. I just helped you remember." 12 days into their journey, Edward stopped breathing. It happened at dawn, in a ravine 3 miles from the eastern province border. Anya had been checking his splint when she noticed the unnatural stillness of his chest, the gray pallor of his skin, the way his eyes had rolled back, showing only whites. She pressed her ear to his ribs and heard nothing. No heartbeat, no breath, just the terrible silence of a body surrendering. No. Her hands moved without thought, pressing against his chest the way she'd once seen a castle physician do when a stable boy had drowned in the horse trough. Push and count. Push and count. Breathe into his mouth. Repeat. You don't get to die now. Not after everything. Not after she died for you. The amber-eyed wolf whined, a sound of distress that the other 3 wolves echoed. They paced anxiously, their instincts screaming that death had arrived and they should flee. But they stayed, pack loyalty overriding survival. Anya worked until her arms shook with exhaustion, until her lips were numb from breathing air into Edward's lungs, until she tasted blood from where she'd bitten her own tongue in desperation. And then, impossibly, Edward's chest spasmed. He coughed, wet and painful, and his eyes focused on her face. "The infection," he gasped. "It's in my blood now, I can feel it. Everything's burning from the inside." His hand caught hers weakly. "Anya, listen, you need to leave me. Take the wolves and cross the border. Find Lady Marjorie in the province capital. She was my mother's sister. Tell her everything. She'll protect you." "Shut up." Anya pressed her palm against his forehead. The fever was astronomical, his skin hot enough to hurt her hand. The leg splint had held. The rib wound had closed, but something internal was killing him. Perhaps organ damage from the fall. Perhaps poison still working through his system. Perhaps simply the accumulated trauma of too many injuries sustained too quickly. "I mean it," Edward insisted, his breathing ragged. "You've kept your promise. You've done more than anyone could ask. But I'm dying, and when I do, you need to be far away. Corwin will have bounties posted. Your description, your connection to wolves, you're too memorable. If anyone sees you with my corpse..." He coughed again, blood staining his lips. "I won't let you hang for saving me." Anya stared at him. This man who'd ordered her family's death and then spent 16 years trying to atone. She thought about justice and mercy, about the old gray wolf's final request, about all the ways love and hate could exist in the same space, inseparable and equally destructive. "I'm not leaving," she said finally. "But we're not stopping either. The province capital is 2 days' travel. You're going to survive 2 more days because I say so." They traveled faster than Edward's condition should have allowed, the amber-eyed wolf moving with desperate determination while Anya ran alongside, supporting Edward's weight when he slumped sideways, forcing water between his lips when consciousness slipped away. The other wolves ranged ahead, their urgency communicating itself to every creature in the forest. Birds erupted from trees at their approach, deer scattered, even a bear cub scrambled up a tree rather than investigate the strange procession. Edward drifted between delirium and clarity. During lucid moments, he talked compulsively, as if words were the only thing keeping death at bay. He told her about laws he'd passed to protect villages, about corrupt nobles he'd stripped of titles, about the network of informants he'd built who might still be loyal. He told her where his mother's family jewels were hidden in the castle, items Corwin wouldn't know to look for, worth enough to fund a resistance. "Promise me something," Edward said on the evening of the 13th day, as they camped within sight of the province border markers. "If I die before we reach Marjorie, promise you'll still tell the truth. About Millbrook, about Corwin, about everything." Anya fed the small fire, not looking at him. "Why does it matter? You'll be dead. Your kingdom will belong to your brother. Nothing I say will change that. Because the people of Millbrook deserve to have their story told by someone who lived it." Edward's eyes were fever-bright but focused. "Because you deserve to speak after 16 years of forced silence. Because maybe truth matters even when it doesn't change outcomes." "Truth got my family killed," Anya said flatly. "My father told the truth about not having enough coin for taxes. Look where that got him. Your father told the truth to the wrong person at the wrong time." Edward shifted, wincing. "I was that wrong person, and I'm asking you to tell the truth to the right people, at a time when it might actually matter, when Corwin's rule is still new enough to be challenged." They crossed into the eastern provinces the next morning. The border was marked by ancient stone pillars carved with symbols Anya couldn't read, and the moment they passed between them, she felt a subtle shift. The air seemed lighter, less oppressive, as if even the atmosphere recognized that Corwin's authority weakened. Here, the province capital appeared in the distance by midday. A walled city smaller than the royal castle, but still impressive, its towers flying banners Anya didn't recognize. Getting Edward through the gates would be impossible. He looked like a corpse propped on a wolf's back, And Anya looked like exactly what she was, a runaway slave covered in grime and blood. Lady Margary's estate is outside the city walls, Edward managed, his voice barely above a whisper. Eastern side, stone manor with, a red door. She'll know me. Tell her the ravens have come home to roost. She'll understand. They found the estate as the sun began its descent. It was smaller than Anya expected, a 2-story stone building with practical rather than ostentatious architecture, surrounded by well-tended gardens. Anya approached the red door with her heart hammering, the wolves hanging back in the tree line with Edward still bound to the amber-eyed wolf's back. The woman who answered her knock was perhaps 50 years old, with Edward's gray eyes and a face that had been beautiful once, but was now carved with lines of worry and grief. She took one look at Anya, bloody, wolf-wild, desperate, and said simply, "You have something to tell me." "The ravens have come home to roost." Anya repeated Edward's words. "Your nephew sent me. He's dying. He's outside with my wolves." Lady Margary's face transformed. She shouted orders to servants, grabbed a cloak, and followed Anya into the trees. At a dead run. When she saw Edward, barely conscious and held upright only by the harness, she pressed her hand to her mouth, tears streaming freely. Sweet, merciful saints, what has Corwin done? She touched Edward's face gently. "Get him inside, quickly. I have a physician who can be trusted." The next hours blurred together. Servants who didn't ask questions helped transfer Edward to a bed. A grim-faced physician examined him, shaking his head at injuries that should have killed him days ago. Lady Margaret listened to Anya's story with growing horror, her hands clenching into fists when Anya described Millbrook, described the old Grey Wolf's sacrifice, described Corwin's poison scheme. "He'll recover," the physician announced finally, his voice cautious. "The fever's breaking. Whatever internal bleeding he had has stopped, but he needs weeks of rest, proper food, and constant monitoring. He was perhaps 6 hours from death when you arrived." Edward survived the night, and the next, and the one after that. By the 4th day, he was conscious enough to give Lady Margaret detailed instructions. Names of loyal nobles, locations of hidden correspondents, strategies for challenging Corwin's rule. Plans were made, messengers were sent, a resistance began to form, but on the 5th day, as Anya sat beside his bed helping him drink broth, Edward's hand caught hers. "I'm going to publicly confess," he said quietly. "About Millbrook, about all of it. When I challenge Corwin for the throne, I'm going to tell the kingdom exactly who I was and what I did." Anya stared at him. "That will destroy you. Even if you win against Corwin, the nobles will never accept a king who admits to massacring innocent villagers." "I know." Edward's smile was sad but genuine. "But I'd rather be destroyed by truth than elevated by silence. And maybe that's the only real atonement I can offer. Not hiding behind good deeds, but standing in the light of what I actually did." 2 weeks after they arrived, Edward stood before a gathered council of Eastern nobles and told them everything. About the poisoning, about Millbrook, about 16 years of guilt eating him alive, about Corwin's treachery and his own crimes. The room erupted in chaos. Half the nobles called for his head. The other half argued for Corwin's removal. And in the middle of it all, Edward looked at Anya and mouthed, "Thank you." But the victory was short-lived. Within days, word reached them that Corwin had declared Edward a traitor spreading lies to reclaim a throne he'd abandoned. Worse, he'd placed a bounty on Anya, 100 gold crowns for the slave who'd murdered his guard and kidnapped his brother. "You have to leave," Lady Margaret told Anya urgently. "Tonight, Corwin's men are already asking questions in the city. Someone will talk eventually." "Where would I go?" Anya asked, feeling the familiar crush of having no choices. "Anywhere." Edward pulled himself from his sickbed, his leg still splinted. "But healing." "But you won't go alone. I've transferred ownership of 3 properties to you, one in the northern mountains, one in the southern coast, one in the disputed western territories, all under a name that can't be traced to you. You have money, land, options." He pressed a heavy purse into her hands. and Lady Margaery has arranged for documents declaring you a free citizen of the eastern provinces. Legal, binding, impossible for Corwin to overturn without starting a war. Anya stared at the purse, at the papers, at this impossible gift. Why? You don't owe me anything. I kept you alive because a wolf asked me to, not because you deserve a choice. Edward interrupted. For the first time in your life, you deserve to choose what happens next, where you go, who you become, whether you ever forgive me or spend the rest of your life hating me. All of it, your choice. That night, Anya left the estate with 4 wolves at her side and freedom papers tucked against her heart. Edward stood at the manor door, leaning heavily on a cane, and watched her disappear into the darkness. She chose the northern mountains, chose isolation and cold and the company of wolves over the complications of human society, built a life in the space between wild and civilized, never fully one or the other. Months later, news reached her mountain refuge. Edward had died, not from his injuries but from poison, Corwin's final successful attempt. But before dying, Edward had given a public confession that had been copied and distributed across the kingdom. The truth about Millbrook, about Corwin's crimes, about the cost of power and the weight of guilt. The confession sparked revolts. Corwin's rule lasted only 3 more months before he was overthrown by the very nobles he'd tried to manipulate. The crown passed to Edward's young daughter, a girl Anya had never known existed, raised in secret by Lady Margaery. Anya stood at her cabin door, reading the news by lamplight. With the amber-eyed wolf pressed against her side, she thought about the old gray wolf, about Edward, about all the ways love demanded impossible sacrifices, and in the morning she began to write the true story of Millbrook, the names of every family killed, every child orphaned, every life destroyed, a testimony in ink rather than blood, truth preserved when justice had failed. The wolves never left her, and Anya never returned to the kingdom. But her words did, carried by travelers and copied by scribes, a ghost voice speaking for the dead until even Corwin couldn't silence her anymore. She'd been a slave, then she'd been a bridge between worlds, and finally, she was simply herself, scarred, surviving, and stubbornly, impossibly free. Anya's story asks us the question we'd all rather avoid. When the person who destroyed your life asks for mercy, do you give it? When justice and compassion stand on opposite sides of an impossible divide, which do you choose? She could have let Edward die in that forest, would have been justified, even righteous in that choice. But a dying wolf asked her to be better than her pain, stronger than her rage, and she honored that request even when it cost her everything she thought she wanted. Sometimes the hardest act of courage isn't fighting back. It's choosing to heal instead of harm, even when harm is exactly what's deserved. We all carry forests inside us, dark places where old wounds still bleed and ghosts still whisper. Anya learned that freedom isn't just the absence of chains. It's the ability to choose your own path even when every path leads through fire. She was raised by wolves, enslaved by humans, and ultimately freed by the impossible decision to honor love over vengeance. Her story reminds us that the creatures we consider savage often understand mercy better than we do, and that sometimes the only way to escape your past is to face it with open hands instead of closed fists. If you found yourself moved by Anya's journey, if her impossible choices made you question what you would do in her place, then this story deserves to be shared. Hit that like button, subscribe to see more stories that challenge your heart, and share this with someone who needs to remember that strength isn't about never breaking. It's about choosing what you rebuild from the pieces. Leave a comment and tell us, would you have saved the king or would you have chosen revenge? Your answer might surprise you.